So our first speaker is Sara Ryan, who is the academic lead at the University of Oxford and is the central figure for the Justice for LB campaign. So please, if you can, give her a warm welcome and make sure that you keep clapping until she's at the mic, because there's nothing worse until you're there and then you walk on to silence. So please put your hands together for Sara Ryan.
Hi, thank you very much for that, Jake. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. It's the first thing I wanted to say. It's the second keynote talk I've given in the past 2 months. Both I felt a complete fraud. This one even more so because my knowledge of the Mental Health Act is risible, and I'd never met an AMP till last night. Still, I've got plenty I can talk about, and I hope that you'll find some of it interesting. I'm hoping everyone in the room knows what happened to our son, Connor Sparrowhawk, also known as Laughing Boy, or LB, and our subsequent campaign for justice and accountability that continues relentlessly. If you don't, I suggest you do a speedy Google in the break and write a note to yourselves to remain on top of what's happening in the health and social care world more effectively. Very briefly, Connor drowned in an NHS bath in July 2013. He was 18 years old and diagnosed with epilepsy and autism. He was both treated as and killed by being perceived as a disposable human being with an inferior mind and body by health and social care. To us, he was and remains a remarkable individual who continues to shine a spotlight on ways of living and being differently. Sadly, this isn't a widely shared position, particularly in health and social care. We know people are dying on average 13 to 20 years before non-learning disabled population in the UK. We know that too many people are leading an impoverished or worse life, both within assessment and treatment units and in the wider community under the banner of independent, supported non-living, as I call it. I acknowledge that my thinking is informed by the particular brutality Connor experienced and was subjected to, and the brutality that we have experienced since his death, by the non-actions or worse of the Southern Health Foundation Trust, NHS Improvement, Jeremy Hunt, pretty much anyone and everyone who should be doing things. I have to say Norman Lamb is exempted from that damning sort of statement. Now, the revised Code of Practice, which I had a little read of in advance of this talk, includes this statement on page 17, as I'm sure you all know. Commissioners, CQC inspectors, general practitioners and other health and social care practitioners and professional regulators all have an interest in identifying concerns about how the Act is being applied. This statement emerged in part, I assume, from the findings of the Serious Case Review into Winterbourne View, which Margaret Flynn, also present, wrote that in many instances, opportunities for professionals across the health and social care system to spot and report abuse and neglect were missed, allowing harm to continue unchecked. Now, I think the statement that this range of stakeholders has an interest, in inverted commas, in identifying concerns about the Mental Health Act being applied is a bit of an assumption, really. And I apologise to all of you in the room for saying that in a way. But why do they have an interest? And how is that interest manifest? Do they really have an interest? And if they do have an interest, why is it never applied effectively or very rarely applied? I also think Margaret's use of the word missed is overly generous. I don't think these things are necessarily missed. Missed implies they were accidentally brushed over. I think they're not noticed or they're ignored. And whatever interpretation is obscene. Does it sound all right? Because I keep... Is it? Yeah? Cool. Okay. The bar is set so low on the conditions to which certain people can be subjected to that abuse and neglect are an accepted part or outcome of health and social care provision. So, a slide. I want to use the example of a quality review of the stat unit Connor died in to explore these points further. This review was published 7 months before Connor died and was conducted by a member of Southern Health Foundation Trust, at the point at which the provision had been taken over from the Ridgeway Partnership. It's a 45-page document and makes for truly extraordinary reading. Oh, actually, I'm going to move on from... No, I'll leave that there, but you don't have to read it because I was working on a Mac, which obviously doesn't translate very well. So the report says on page 4 to 5, I am informed that there are various therapies. It was difficult at times to determine what type of treatment a person was receiving. People who have used the specialist health services as an inpatient commented they did not always engage in therapies. They did say they joined with some group therapies, such as good thinking groups, which I am informed, did support understanding of behaviour. So there's just an extract from this document. It is absolutely nonsense what it's saying. I am informed. People said they didn't actually do things, but I'm informed that they did. It was difficult to know what people did. Such a loose pinning down of what's actually happening in a unit with the most vulnerable people inside, and I hate using the word vulnerable, but really, it's a shorthand term. This is in a short-term treatment and assessment unit for which commissioners are paying £3,500 a week per patient, 4 or 5 patients in total. You think alarm bells might be ringing if they can't even review what sort of therapies people are receiving. The review goes on to say that the low budget impacts on the team's ability to offer more choice and be imaginative in the kitchen. So at a cost of £500 per day per patient, they couldn't even be fed properly. Some more extracts from the report. Okay, you don't have to read all of this, but basically it's saying patients commented staff were helpful, nice and supportive. Feedback from some patients said they were times when staff were very strict, in inverted commas, with them. For some people, they said this was understandable as they needed to be managed firmly. Now, I don't know anyone in this world who would say, I need to be managed firmly. It's really good that staff are strict with me, but anyway. Others fed back that while staff are strict, this could upset them. Strict is the term used by patients who fed back as part of this review. We did observe staff being a mix of firm in their use of language, as well as being effective listeners and having equitable conversations with people. Others fed back there were times when the staff on the unit felt like a prison. This was linked by the way it looked, the locked doors and keys. The jangling of the keys was commented by several people. That statement sent a sort of chill down my neck, really. When you think of the situation people are in with experiencing mental ill health and a learning disability, being locked in a unit with staff jangling keys in a sort of threatening way. Next one, this is quite remarkable. Short-term assessment and treatment units. This one is about the bedrooms. People have their own rooms. When a person has been residing at STAT for a long period of time, over 2 years, they have made their room more homely and warm. Somebody actually wrote this. That's what I can't understand, is how anybody could write that a person in a short-term assessment and treatment centre has made their room comfortable and warm after 2 years. And a final extract. During this review, a patient did comment that there were times when they felt uncomfortable due to the noise, and also commented that they were scared by some staff whose approach was loud. This was also highlighted in previous visits completed by the person's social worker. This was raised with the service, and they agreed to follow this up. The use of language here is both fascinating and chilling. A patient did comment, a comment being a throwaway statement of little value. They've commented, in inverted commas, that they were scared by staff. The service have agreed, in a very sort of, reciprocal way, that they will follow this up. Where is the alarm? Where is the concern? Where is the outrage? This whole review smacks of a combination of chumminess between the reviewers and the reviewed, incompetence, carelessness and ignorance, and a cracking example of how abuse or neglect is missed in inverted commas. An apparently experienced professional undertook this review, wrote the review report, circulated it among the Trust, Oxfordshire County Council, Oxfordshire Clinical Commissioning Group, and nothing happened. Nothing. Nothing at all. We had no idea about the existence of this quality review when we took our son to be admitted to that unit 6 months, five or 6 months later. That still makes me feel quite sick. We had no idea how poor the quality of the unit was. We naively thought that a specialist unit with 4 or 5 patients and 4 members of staff on duty all the time was somewhere appropriate for Connor to be assessed and treated, in inverted commas, for his distress, the distress he seemed to experience. These thoughts rapidly changed after Connor's admittance as an informal patient, but before we could blink, he'd been sectioned that first evening after being brutally restrained, face down, by 4 people for over 10 minutes. Our son stopped being a sixth former at that point and became something which I can't even put a name to because I don't think it exists. There was no approved mental health professional that we know of. I met my first one last night. Well, I met a few, actually. Here's a blog I wrote at the time. So it's the early hours of day 28, at the end of section 2. I don't know what language or the ways we should be talking about this, so apologies if I'm being crass, is what I wrote at the time. I don't care anymore. LB's now been detained for 28 days. I'm awake. I think I wrote this at about 4 a.m. Worrying, agitating. I know through a kind of detective work and realisation of strategic positioning that LB isn't going to come home tomorrow, but I don't know that for sure. Here's what we have to go on. A, it's unlikely he'll be sectioned tomorrow because he's more chilled out. B, the mental capacity team, who are, ? Are likely to decide he lacks capacity to return home. Apparently they were going to pitch up this afternoon. Who are they? ? C, no one has been in touch with us to discuss Connor coming home. No one, like who? ? The bar is set so low. So, commissioners, social workers, clinicians, OTs, nurses, etc. don't see learning disabled people as human. This is evidenced by the complete lack of attention to the findings of this quality review. A year later, after Connor died, a CQC inspection of the stat unit failed it on all 10 domains and issued 6 enforcement notices. Might have been four enforcement or 6, can't remember. I suspect the findings of the quality review are repeated across the country, and this isn't specific to Oxfordshire. So I'm going to ask you, what does good look like? Does anybody really know what good looks like? And why does good for learning disabled people look so different than good for the rest of us? Why do learning disabled people have a tepid, hollow good that is just in the immediate? They are always denied an imagined future. It's always about the here and now at the most mediocre and lowest you can reach without explicitly harming someone. And how do the principles of the Code of Practice encourage this? I hope this is something you'll think about for the rest of the day. There was a CQC inspection of a residential home in the north of England last year, a home where 21 autistic and learning disabled people live with 2 to 3 support staff on duty. It received a good rating. I don't know why the inspector didn't fail the home from where he or she was sitting at their office. How we could possibly have a home for 21 autistic and learning disabled adults in the 21st century. But no, it got a good rating. It got a good rating because the residents, in inverted commas, because if it's not your real home, you're a resident. The residents were kept clean, well-fed and safe. This is just extraordinary. This report was written, the place was observed, inspected, the report's written, the report's circulated, and nobody is saying, why have we got 21 people being kept in a house up north in the 21st century? The fact that people couldn't go out and do anything because there wasn't enough staff, lead a life that the rest of us are able to lead, was completely ignored. There was no sense of these people as humans. They're just things, in inverted commas, to be contained and fed. The bar is so low. Another question, what is safeguarding? And how do the boundaries between safeguarding, a good life, and a low bar blur? How much safeguarding is life-seeping through unintended consequences? Why have we got a whole industry around safeguarding when we should just keep people safe? The person, the human, is again on the periphery of the business that goes on, the talk, the salaries, the careers. And the third question, I suppose, is why have families persistently been the problem? Why are mothers in particular depicted as difficult, challenging and obstructive? Jeremy Hunt talked about a witchcraft last week on our local news, which was delightful, around the removal of Katrina Percy. No reflection on the grubby tricks that we've been subjected to relentlessly for 3 years. This demonising of parents is not only deeply distressing, but it's completely destructive and wasteful too. I wanted to read 2 comments that have been posted on my blog by somebody who calls herself Weary Mother. She has a son who's about 57, I think. Sara, you are once who we were. We, the old, the scared, the anonymous, cannot name NHS trusts or the local authority, for they have not yet killed our children. And it keeps us powerless and it diminishes us, for we fail our children every day. A second comment from her, she said, sorry for taking up so much space. The position of the parent is you're always apologising. You're apologising for being a parent all the time. She says, I feel it's important to add that my efforts to help my son were all-consuming and massive, life-consuming, brutally costly to every other part of my and my family's lives. I did all I could, and like you, Sara, I was a researcher, and I'm a long-in-the-tooth professional and a consultant. All I was and all that I am was not enough. I could not protect my son, and he has suffered so much. There were constant inferences around who does she think she is? It's ex's mum again. In order for things to change, we need to recognise that people should be leading lives that contain joy, fun, light and adventure. In order for things to change, we need people to be bold, to stand up and challenge. There will be no actual change until health and social care professionals and others change their perceptions of what it means to be learning disabled. That is, to see learning disabled people, as full, engaging and productive citizens, if we allowed them. Hopefully. Oh, hang on. So, a tweet from Chris Hatton from the other day I think was quite powerful. We need to never forget these details. I was tweeting about the quality review, and retain our capacity to be shocked by them. And that is part of the problem. I think we lose our capacity to be shocked and we accept the unacceptable. Coming back to the title of my talk, which I've completely ignored, I think that within the deeply unequal society we live in, the obscenely unequal society, made so much more visible to so many more people by the unfolding of austerity, Brexit and the nastiness we see happening in full view pretty much daily, there is no or little inequality among learning disabled people, ironically. Obviously there's huge inequality between learning disabled people and everyone else, but within, say, learning disabled people, there is no inequality. Everybody is the same and treated the same. The family background of a person can allow some protection from the brutality of service provision, but when a person becomes an adult, this protection is whittled away by the actions of local authorities and the misappropriation or misuse, often, of the Mental Health Act or the Mental Capacity Act. This means, certainly for learning disabled people, talk about the Mental Health Act, the Mental Capacity Act, commissioning, transforming care, and everything that came before this is pretty pointless. The Code of Practice makes complete sense in one way. The 5 underpinning principles are spot on. The problem is learning disabled people are wallowing way outside its reach. And yet we can talk about the Code of Practice and the content of both the Mental Health Act and the Mental Capacity Act forever and a day without any recognition of this. We have around 3,000 people detained in ATUs. The efforts to get people back into their communities over the past 5 years have been painful, embarrassing, expensive and heartbreaking for those incarcerated still and their families. Empowerment, involvement, respect and dignity are slippery beasts if you have a learning disability. There is a kind of shifting that is fake empowerment too often to suit the needs or desires of staff or others. Too often families are seen, the involvement of families too is often disregarded in practice. Families are seen as the problem and excluded. Respect and dignity is not afforded to people who are perceived to be non-human or those who love them. I'm going to finish with 2 separate points. One is another extract from Weary Mother, which I found hugely moving. I had it on a slide, but I think it's going to be too big, so I'm going to have to power through and read it. My son is an actor with a group composed of people with learning disabilities. With tears running down my face, I watched him when they performed a play about the First World War. My son was the only soldier from that village to come home. In his tattered uniform, he came slowly down the aisle in church, last post playing quietly. He leaned heavily on his stick, as he does now from damage done to him in real life. His head bandaged and bloody. At the front, the widow's wait with his wife, who moves towards him in a beautiful and moving joy. In the background, slowly, and in time to the gently paid last post, a row of our dead boys walk in line, eyes bandaged and unseeing. Comrades all, arms stretched out, hands on comrades' shoulders. I wept. So many, so bloody many. Harm is done to our boys and girls like those widows. And like those widows, we are grateful if they just come home. Now, I don't want to be Captain Bring Down, although I realise I always am. So I'll end by saying that the Justice for LB campaign which has not only shone a much-needed spotlight on the deep failings of health and social care around the treatment of learning disabled people in life and death, and has been completely run on a voluntary basis by an enormous amount of people who shouldn't be doing the jobs that other very well-paid and well-rewarded people should be doing. But it has also generated magic, joy and beauty. Next week, we'll be walking a cardboard cutout Justice for LB bus along the Camino de Santiago. Hopefully the picture... Oh, there it is. We'll be walking a cardboard cutout bus along the Camino de Santiago to drop it off in advance of a festival that's being held on December the 2nd in Aviles, Spain, to mark the International Day of Disabilities. There's various people joining us along the way. We're going to walk about 100 miles, carrying the cardboard bus that luckily has windows cut into it, so we'll be photographing people as we go. We crowdsourced money to enable some people from My Life, My Choice to join the walk. When we first raised the idea that learning disabled people should also join us on this walk, we were told they can't walk very far. I can't walk very far either, I said. It's about the bloody training. Thank you.